So you have returned to Stephen King's 3 Nights of Terror here at the Fireside Tales. We have been telling stories about ghosts and witches and scary pumpkins. And on this, our second night, we will be telling the story of the Scarecrow. So, now it is time to travel into the abyss of madness and stare into the eyes of death itself, as Seth Lewis reads our story. This was a place that God had forsaken, a lonely old farmhouse at the edge of the wilderness. There lived here a farmer named Jimmy Gourd. Now, Jimmy Gourd was a man that was lonely. He was lonely beyond my words to possibly describe. He spent all his days out on the farm, tilling the earth and cutting logs, and the man just never had any friends, and all of his family had been drunkards and thieves who had left him all by himself. And it was a miracle, in fact, that he himself had not turned to a life of crime, although he was almost there at that point. But every day, once he was done working, he would walk back to his farmhouse, and he would pass by a scarecrow sitting out in the front of his yard. And he would look at it for a moment, and sometimes he would say to it, "What are you looking at? Why can't you jump off that stick right now and attack me? Why can't you move? No, things like you, they always just stay in their place, do as they're told. Well, I am tired of such things. I am tired of a world where everything just does what is meant to do." He would walk back into his farmyard, and he would do things like this all the time. When he passed by the scarecrow, he would punch it and kick it, and he would spit on it, and he had a deep hatred for it. In fact, it was an obsession, for as he would sit at the breakfast table, he would be thinking to himself of the scarecrow, and many times at night he would simply stare out at it and wait for it to move or do something, but it never did. And so this went on for many years, until finally one day, Jimmy Gourd had drunken quite a lot, quite more than he was ever used for, and he looked out and he saw the scarecrow sitting out there smiling, and he felt it was taunting him, and he leaped out of the window, and he jumped forward. He was in quite a fury at this point, and he ran towards it and he yelled, "Come on, you thing! Move! It is time for you to move! Do something! Why? Why can you not?" And he looked at it for a moment and it didn't answer. "Damn you, I'll make you talk!" And he pushed the scarecrow down onto the ground, and he began to hit it and punch it, and he smashed its face. And the scarecrow just looked up at him with its button eyes and didn't say a thing, just stared at him. And Jimmy Gourd was getting quite angry at this point, for it didn't seem that the scarecrow was any more alive now than it had been before. So he walked forward and he picked up a large stone, and he walked towards it and he said, "You will move now, won't you?" And he lifted it up, and as he was about to bring the stone down onto the scarecrow's head, it looked up at him and said, "Shut your damn mouth, Jimmy Gourd." And Jimmy Gourd looked at it for a moment, and he dropped the stone with terror, and the scarecrow did indeed jump up, and it grabbed a stick and it began to stab Jimmy Jimmy all over the face, and finally cut his neck, and he laid there dying, and the scarecrow dropped it. He knew that his master was dead, and he looked around. He was now merely a creature of instinct, and I must say also that he had not been alive until that point. This was the first moment that he existed, although he could indeed remember all those moments that Jimmy Gourd had taunted him. So he began to try and find some place to hide. He went out into the forest, and he looked around for a moment, and he was still holding that stick in his hand. And as he was looking around, he saw something truly beautiful. There was a white deer walking up to the stream, and the deer went down and it took a little drink, and it seemed quite beautiful sitting there, so peaceful, so tranquil, something that an artist would paint a picture of. And the Scarecrow looked at it, and he began to walk quietly towards it. And the creature didn't even notice. It just continued drinking, and finally the Scarecrow jumped upon it and began to stab it in the neck. And the creature began to try to get away, but it was of no use. Soon it was lying there dead. And the Scarecrow looked down at it for a moment, and it tried to eat the meat, but it was unable to, of course, because it was a Scarecrow. So instead, it dropped the stick and left the deer there, sprawled down on the ground. The Scarecrow had killed an innocent living creature, another beauty of nature destroyed, I suppose you could say. Anyways, the Scarecrow walked to a little farm, and here I will momentarily stop the story to tell you who owned this farm. The man was a preacher. His name was Herbert Russell. He wasn't just a farmer, he also spent a lot of time as a preacher. And he was a very religious man, and he believed in raising his daughter, Evelyn, and his wife, Maud, in a family devoted to God. Maud was actually already having another child, a little baby. They didn't know, of course, what it was yet. And all of them were sitting there eating their meal. And the father asked Evelyn to go out into the barn and milk some cows and bring in the milk for them to drink. And so she agreed. She began to walk forward. And as she entered the barn, she thought that she heard something. But then she assumed that it was her imagination. Anyway, she went over to the cow and she began to milk it and put the milk down in the bucket. But as she was sitting there, she heard a voice. "Don't move. Don't move or I will kill you." And she turned around to see the Scarecrow standing there. And the Scarecrow, although it had a smile on its face, its look was somehow of pure venom. I don't know how. After all, it was a Scarecrow, but Scarecrows can say a lot with their faces sometimes. But anyways, she let out a soft cry, but luckily enough, she didn't let out a scream. And as the Scarecrow was about to go towards her, and I don't know what he would have done at this point, although it didn't have a weapon, so maybe it wouldn't have killed her, there was a sound of a horse coming up, and it was a loud gallop. And the Scarecrow told her to be quiet, and they walked over to the barn door, and they looked out. And they could see a man, and this man was quite an ugly man, and he looked like a drunkard himself as he leaped off the horse, and he said, Herbert? Herbert Russell?" And Herbert Russell appeared out of the house, and he went up and he said, "Oh, Roscoe, how do you do?" And they shook hands and gave each other the usual pleasantries. And finally Roscoe said, "Well, I have bad news for you. There seems to be a murderer on the loose. There was a body found down at the old Gourd farm. The man in question, his face was all broken up, but we believe it was the owner. Anyways, if you sight anything in this territory, please let us know." And Herbert said, "Well, my daughter was in the barn. Honey, did you notice anything peculiar?" And she sailed out, "No, father, I didn't notice." And he didn't think anything of this. His daughter was usually very shy around strangers. So they said goodbye, and he went away. The Scarecrow watched until the man was gone, and he turned to her. "Water. Bring me water." Anyway, the little girl, she did as she was told. She went back to the house, and she got some water, and she ran back, and she handed it to the Scarecrow. And the Scarecrow took a drink, and he looked at the girl. And it seemed like it was thinking to itself, but for whatever reason, and I don't know what it could be, he seemed to decide not to kill her, for he said, "I'm going to sleep here. And if you tell anyone that I am in this barn, I will make sure to cut your throat." Well, the girl said that she would obey, and she went back into the little house. And that is where we are going to stop the story for now. We will have to find out what happens to the Scarecrow on the third night of terror.